Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today, I would like to address you in regards to a concept that I think is a really good idea for reimagining what it is that America stands for. I believe that the United States of America is a country that is losing sight of the original spirit of intent of its founding, that we are meant to be a nation of people that are independent yet united in order to form a more perfect union and work together so that we can establish justice, ensure our domestic tranquility, and provide for our common defense, and promote our general welfare, and secure our blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. We established for ourselves these basic tenets, like this is what we have to stand for, this is what we have to be about, this is what we have to pursue in order to even claim that we are a nation. And the founding fathers, the founders decided we're going to put together this, stance, and we're going to put it into recorded form, and we're going to say this is what we're going to be about, and we're going to live by those words because they stand for what we believe within ourselves is what we're going to be about, why we do the things that we do. And none of this came easy. And everything that we stand for today in terms of what we've accomplished in the past is hard fought for and hard won. And none of it has come easy. And there were many times where things that we appreciate and value today were denied and not possible for us not too long ago. And right now we're seeing a lot of drawing back, why people are so intent on trying to take us back to an earlier time, back in the day when America was so great because we had tariffs, and so great because women didn't have rights, and so great because we had slavery and segregation, so great. Nothing about any of that was great. The greatness came for our capacity to overcome those things which were actually limiting us and holding us back. They were the things that were preventing us from achieving those tenets that we said, we're providing for the common defense, we're promoting the general welfare, all people are created equal. These things that we said represented what formalized us as a nation. When we recognized that we weren't upholding that or weren't living up to that, we made changes socially, culturally, and politically, and economically, and we altered ourselves and our lives, our way of being, and we altered our way of relating with one another, and we altered the way we do business, the way we do education, how we establish infrastructure. All of these things changed based off of our changed values, which were not trying to bring us back to the way things were, but rather to progress towards an ever more perfect union. And our union isn't perfected by segregations, or limitations, but by extending liberties to everybody as much as is possible so that we're not infringing on each other's independence. And so when I see that there's policies that are trying to take us back to removing, rights for women, or removing rights for people of color, or removing rights from individuals who were able to, marry who they want, and be who they want to be and show up in the world however they choose, these sorts of things. For a person to be able to determine what happens to their own body and how they're going to pursue their own personal health care and well-being. Like, these sorts of things are being, like, taken away from us by people in government who think that they know better than the individual, you know, how to live their lives, and that's just simply not the case. That's not liberty. That's not freedom. You know, that's control and that's conformity. And the pretense by which they're trying to justify why they're doing this is not even just, fair, reasonable, or right. You know? And so it really is disturbing to see that there's so many people in power right now in the current administration, which is actually a regime. I call it the POTUS 47 regime because it's not an administration. None of these people are working to achieve the tenets, and they aren't working for the people. They're working for self-centered interests and trying to, you know, achieve the playbook of the Project 2025. And it's really disturbing because you see, like, the type of world that they're trying to create is a really just miserable place. And it enables a lot of, like, bad humanity, and it really promotes a lot of divisiveness and hatred and violence. And it doesn't outright say it, but it gives the undertones of permission. It allows for bad behavior. It actually reinforces it and encourages it and even rewards it. You know, POTUS 47 incited an insurrection on our nation's capital because he didn't like the outcome of an election. And then those people who, by their own free will, chose to go and disturb the peace, you know, cause mayhem and disorder and lead to the unfortunate death of individuals, they were freed and pardoned by POTUS 47, who is trying to reframe history to say that was a day of love and it was a good thing, when it wasn't. It was a day of violence and terror and bad humanity on full display. And POTUS 47, which was POTUS 45 at the time, actually allowed it and then refused to step in to prevent it from getting worse. And, you know, that right there just kind of says the mentality that he uses in terms of his decision making is he's perfectly fine with bad things happening as long as they're achieving outcomes that he desires to have. And in those desires, he was thinking of himself, and he was thinking of his supporters, and thinking of the outcome that they wanted to have and how they might be able to go about forcing it to the ends that they desired, and were willing to do whatever it takes, including bad things, in order to achieve that. And so when you think of it, that's who they are, that's how they think, and that's how they solve problems. And by creating other problems and then trying to force people to, you know, conform to their ideals, and they're willing to do violence in order to make that happen. And then you look that he pardoned all of these people, and while I am a great believer in redemption and forgiveness and discipline and you know, actual correction to help people to reintegrate back into society after making mistakes, and I do believe many of these people were aware that they made a mistake, but because they were not given an opportunity to be redeemed, they were instead villainized, that they just went all in on it. It's like unfortunate how that ended up happening. I really think that the best outcome that we could have had with this last election for POTUS 47 to not be Trump, but to have been someone else that had the best interest of America at heart, best interest of humanity at heart, would have actually accepted, the presidency and honored the will of the people, to be a leader for all people, and offered the opportunity to make sure that everybody who did wrong on the day of the insurrection had their day in court, faced, the consequences, and then were set on a path of redemption so that they could work their way to achieving, a pardon for what they did. And knowing that that was an actual possibility. Like, we want to be able to reintegrate you back into society. We just want you to also understand that we can't accept these sorts of things happening. Like, this was wrong. What you did was wrong. But we're not here to hold that against you for the rest of your life. We really want this to be a United States. We, the people. And then to give Trump an opportunity to seek redemption as well. Because I understand not winning an election really a difficult thing to process. I can understand that, especially when you are the sitting president and then you're getting voted out of office. I'm sure that was really difficult, especially because he had plans that he was trying to, he only had 4 years. Man, come on, guys, I'm going to do more. But the problem was he wasn't instilling a lot of confidence in the American people for them to entrust him with another 4 years, especially because they were in the middle of a pandemic and he was making a lot of really bad decisions. He wasn't taking it seriously enough and people were dying unnecessarily. He was making a lot of mistakes that proved that he just wasn't capable to be president at the time, to do the right thing and do right by the people. And many of the things that he was doing was starting to become a little too controlling and manipulative and negative, and he was pushing past boundaries and trying to subvert checks and balances already as POTUS 45. And it was suggesting to the American people, like, as much as his supporters loved him and were all about, let's go all in with Trump, man, he's gonna do the right thing because government's really bad and we gotta fix this sort of stuff. Not to say that he didn't do some good things, because there were definitely people that were in his administration that helped him to achieve some good things while he was president at the time. And I'm not saying that he's not accomplishing things that are necessary right now, even though I don't agree with his methods. I do accept that there are some things that he is approaching to try to get done that actually are necessary. But how you do anything is very important. That's the point. The ends are necessary, but the ends can't justify the means, and the means themselves have to come from a place of intention of, we're going to do the right thing to make sure that this happens. But also not limit ourselves to, over restricting our capacity to innovate new solutions to find, better practices, best practices. But I don't think that that's what they're doing, unfortunately. I think that they are just smash and grab and, break this and dismantle that. And they're reimagining and rebuilding, which is necessary and important, because America is in a phase change that's necessary right now with the conditions of the world. We had to change and evolve, but the way that they're going about it is senseless. It has no guidance. The Project 2025 is the only guidance that they have. When you look at the terms and conditions of it, it's trying to take us back into history, into a really terrible time when things were not fair, they were not just, they were not reasonable, they were not right. A lot of people suffered unnecessarily. And to think that going back in America's time, like, there was no better time to live than now. I mean, we have accomplished so much to make the world such an amazing place. You would never want to go back in time because things were shitty. in comparison. Sure, maybe a couple things here and there were like, oh, that was nice, but and maybe we lost out on being able to do that thing anymore, but the trade-off, the consensus that we built was like, it's better to let go of those things so that we can have our hands free to be able to grasp the potential of other things. And we've evolved and we've changed and we've grown, and I mean, look at how much freedom we've been able to extend to ourselves. We started off, women didn't have rights, African Americans didn't have rights, we had slavery of both, and we were sending kids off to war, but they weren't even allowed to vote, and so we changed all those things. We went through and made constitutional amendments to give us, we recognize, that's actually not liberty, that's constraining, and that's infringing on people's rights, and we want to create more freedoms and more liberties. How might we be able to accomplish that? And the problem is, society has it in their heads that, we need to have really big government in order to control such a large nation, and then things get out of hand because you are entrusting way too many people with their own sordid interests. And it's hard, who are going to watch the watchers sort of thing, and to make sure that they're doing the right thing. Where we see a lot of that now, where people in Congress may well have been conducting insider trading, knowing that what POTUS 47 was going to do with tariffs, and then they went in and decided that they were going to make a quick buck off of knowing before everybody else knew. And we have systems of integrity and rules and bounds and regulations and laws that say you're not supposed to do that. That's not allowed, because that's not just, not fair, not reasonable, not right. And it's an abuse of your power and your privilege and your knowledge, and you're using it to a personal advantage that actually puts everybody else at a disadvantage, and that's not right. And so, and then knowing that there's nobody to hold them accountable, because the highest ranking positions of decision making are the ones who are actually involved in it, and they're not going to hold anybody accountable, or if you think about Signalgate, right, where a poor decision was made by some, people in very high positions of authority who had shared very sensitive information on a very vulnerable platform, and that information, unfortunately, was leaked to somebody that never should have had access to that, but was brought in, inadvertently, to be informed of the situation. And had that been a different person that didn't have integrity to, and then the sense that they had to inform the public about this, mistake that was made, that was actually quite dangerous and put soldiers at risk, and threatened our national security, and the fact that happened and nobody's being held accountable for it is just proof that this administration has no desire to have any consequences held against them, but they're willing to use their power to punish other people, create consequences that never really existed before, so that they can enforce, the consequences on people who, until the idea of, wrongdoing was magically established, all of a sudden, those people did no wrong. So, kind of like deporting people, claiming that somebody is a criminal without having no proof, you're fabricating laws and rules and establishing consequences, and then punishing people based off of arbitrary nonsense. And then there's no accountability, no transparency, no proof that you're actually doing something that is legal, and right. And so I think the problem is not just the fact that they're trying to take us backwards, and the Project 2025 playbook is really about just concentrating power into the hands of a few people who have parasitic tendencies to prey on weaknesses of others, and then to segregate people and to limit their capacities to have decision-making powers in society, segregating based off of race and sex and ethnicity and these sorts of things, nation of origin, whether you're an immigrant or you're a native citizen, these sorts of things, and to know that they are using that as a distinguishment in order to determine how the government is going to intervene in your life, not on your behalf. What the Project 2025 does is the government does to you. Nothing in that book is what the government does for you. And I think that's the fundamental difference that we really need to pay attention to, is that they're about doing to you, inflicting, enforcing, causing, instead of recognizing government's supposed to be there to, when necessary, intervene on our behalf. But for the most part, people are self-governed. And that, I think, is the original spirit of intent of our nation, was to be like, we're a bunch of people who are independent. We're an independent nation. People are wise enough to make decisions for themselves. If we think them not capable of being smart enough to adhere to those sorts of things, the best corrective measure is for educating them, and for, in those cases when conflicts arise, we intervene on the behalf of the people in order to settle it into an accord where we can live in mutualities with each other still. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening. POTUS 47 regime is really about pitting people side against side, and then staging a system that's so rigged forever out of the favor of all of the lower echelons of society, even the people that are, considered MAGA, that are, fans of Trump and followed him along and helped vote him in for a second time. A lot of those people are suffering too. Like, nobody is safe from this unfortunate continuum of negative outcome consequences from the decision making of people that don't have the best interests of individuals or America or even the world at heart. And so I think that the problem with recognizing where we're at in the state of things, we really do need to make changes. There was a lot that was going on with our nation that wasn't working. As great as things were in some regards, man, we were failing so many Americans. Like, I've traveled across America driving and really going into like this small neck of the woods of towns and urban areas and rural areas, and driving through neighborhoods and through big cities and everything, I really wanted to immerse myself and understand the human condition, the human element as it's represented, what's the consistency of the American identity throughout city to city, town to town in the United States. And everywhere I went, I saw people suffering unnecessarily. I saw deteriorating infrastructures. I saw filth and grime, and the habitability and livability of cities in major decline. Many places that just looked like they were not cared for. And lots of people that were living by really meager means. Had a lot of struggling. I saw a lot of crime, a lot of homeless people living on the streets or living in their vehicles, or squatting in buildings, or abandoned houses and things like that. And the problem is that that's not an indicator of well-being. That signals that everywhere in every state across the nation, like, we have signs of decline. And the problem is that those signs got way worse after COVID. You know, many buildings shut down, many businesses shut down, many people that, you know, had stability in their lives they lost all their savings, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they lost their dignity, and they turned to you know sensing that they had no hope, and they kind of just gave up at life. And there were people that were at high pinnacles of their life and really on top and doing well, and then COVID came and then it just ruined everything. What happened during COVID was absolutely wrong. We never should have shut down like we did. You know, I do believe that we needed to take a quick break from being involved with everybody, make quick adjustments to make sure we had adequate ventilation in spaces and that everybody was practicing social distancing, wearing masks, you know, doing the good work to try to be able to find ways there potential for a vaccine. All of that kind of stuff was good. The problem was that it then became this sense that people felt that their individual freedoms were being limited, and they saw themselves like losing their wealth and their savings, and they're desperate and they're like feeling they're imprisoned, and that's kind of what ended up happening. And so I feel like there was a lot of discontent that was flared up during that time, and then it just compounded on top of, you know, the negative outcome consequences from poor decision making based on part of, you know, those in power at the time, which was POTUS 45 to start with, and then going into, you know, POTUS 46 as well. I don't think any of the ways that things were handled were appropriate. I think there was gross infringement on people's personal liberties. I think there was a drastic shift of wealth, and I think that there was a lot of impoverishment, and 90% of that, you know, probably could have been prevented, along with the prevention of many of the people who lost their lives, you know, unnecessarily. I think that the approach was, you know, what happened proved that we really weren't ready to come together as a nation to be able to solve a problem in a way that works for everybody. It was a stress test, and it proved that we are very weak as a nation. And unfortunately, as an outcome because of that, we are a weaker nation. And that actually set the tone for, you know, POTUS 46 to come in and do what they did to help to try to stimulate the economy, bring things back a little bit. And things were, you know, coming back into normal. We had to live in this weird, awkward stance for a long time, and it really was an infringement on our liberties. But they did what they thought they had to do, given we didn't really have very good models in recent times of how to deal with this based off of how connected we are and how mobilized we are as a society. We've never been, you know, this way before and had a pandemic. So, you know, I think that they tried to do the best they could, but I think a lot of bad decisions were made because they weren't thinking about the individual in terms of the consequences of that. And I think it was a terrible decision on their part to send stimulus money. I think that there was a better way to approach that. I was even thinking during the time, like, gosh, we really need an auxiliary economy that we can shift into in times of distress, that ensures that everybody is still able to be productive and able to still provide for themselves, that doesn't impact the, you know, actual legacy economy. And that when we're done with, you know, the emergency mode, we can shift back into the regular legacy economy, and then slowly over time pay down what we've had to use in our auxiliary economy, you know, in the, you know, intermedium between, you know, the imminent moment of emergency and crisis striking, and then when we actually have it contained enough to bring ourselves back into a sense of normalcy. If we had an auxiliary economy, we could shift into, a lot of the problems that we had wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have gone into so much debt. People wouldn't have had to lose their houses and all of their savings. We could have made do with what we had. But unfortunately, people weren't thinking like that who were in decision-making roles, and a lot of bad outcomes ended up happening. And so the problem with that is that it pissed off a lot of people and made them willing to allow somebody to come in that is going to, I'm going to solve it, I'm going to fix it. And now we have a very extreme knee-jerk response in the form of POTUS 47. Coming in and him trying to claim, if I was president and, if I would have won because I won, that other election, things would be so much better now. Like, I don't believe that that's the case. I think he was the wrong president for the time after COVID. I think it was best that he wasn't president, for POTUS 46, because of the fact that he would have had no check and balance in terms of saying, like, the approach that you're taking is actually causing more harm and leading us in a negative trajectory. We were able to shift into a different trajectory. I don't think it was the best one, but it was one that actually kicked us out of going into a really negative state, because Trump would have just been more ennobled and empowered. But then it convinced a lot of people that POTUS 46 didn't do the right job, and so they were willing to vote, Trump back in to become POTUS 47. And he came, prepared this time to say, he really wasn't prepared in his first administration, and he wasn't able to get a lot of things done because of that, because there were forces working against him, because he was trying to, shake things up and run the government in a way that it was just didn't have the capacity to do. And he was navigating that as best that he could, but he was failing in a lot of ways because of his intentions were not to help all people. It was to do some really, negative things, build the wall and, make everybody hate immigrants. And like, that was his go-to theme. And, that doesn't really resonate with a lot of people, even though they try to make it seem like it resonates with people now. The only reason why it seems to resonate to, go after immigration in such an intense way is because they've demonized human beings and led others to believe that an immigrant is less than an American. The Americans are, so much higher value, and immigrants are the reason why your life is miserable, and it's not. Like, immigrants are the reason why our nation is functional. It's such a dysfunctional nation that actually having immigrants here is what has been keeping us afloat for so long. And now that they're being forcibly removed, and some of them, disappeared away into terrible conditions, unconscionable places, we're going to have a lot of big consequences in terms of like who's going to fill those roles. And I think that the POTUS 47 regime has it in their head that regular everyday Americans all of a sudden going to, be so desperate because the price of everything's going to be so high. That's why tariffs are necessary, is kick up the price of everything, because then desperation sinks in, and then everybody will start to work and be willing to work these, menial jobs for less pay. And then they're removing the protections of unions and things like that. So then workers have less rights and then less protections. And so people are, going to basically be in modern day slavery. You're not going to make enough for a living wage to be able to support yourself and your family. But the only jobs that are going to be available are these ones. And then it's going to create a massive, gap in between the haves and the have-nots. And that's what they want. And I mean, they're triggering, ups and downs in the stock market so that they can, all make a quick buck off of insider trading. And so their interests are self-serving. They're for a very small predatory class of individuals that are looking for the next opportunity to be able to make a quick buck and be able to steal away a little bit of power, and make it so this situation so desperate for the lower echelons of society, basically everybody who's not a part of this, parasitic elite class at the top, so that everybody has to fall in line in conformity. They're easier to control, and so that's why you don't see any of the policies that the POTUS 47 regime is doing has anything to do with actually improving the lives of individuals. Like they upped the price of everything by triggering this tariff war, and then claim that they're making the egg prices go down when it's gone down, but only after it went up. And it's like a dozen eggs is still $10 in a lot of places. And that's just not sustainable. So it's pricing people out of things that they used to be able to have as a daily staple. And it's not just eggs, it's eggs and it's milk and it's butter and it's cheese and it's cereal and, it's tuna and it's steaks and it's chicken and it's all of these things that, people need for sustenance. Regular vegetables, even things that are grown in the United States are becoming more expensive. Especially because in order for farmers to be able to make enough money off of their crops, they have to be able to sell surplus to other countries. And tariffs make it just not possible for them to be able to do that. And so you're seeing a lot of, I believe it's intentional, especially because the vice president has a whole app scheme to be able to buy up farmlands. I believe that they're trying to destitute as many farms as possible so that big investors can come in, buy it up on the cheap, and then they become controllers of the food system. And if you can control the food, you control the population, because it's an energy source. It's just like with, gas and things like that. If you control the energy source, you control the people. That's the simplest way to control people. And so I believe that the reason why none of their policies are about improving situations. They're about punishing, extracting, removing people, preventing progress, limitations. Tariffs are limitations, and scaring and fear-mongering, and, turning the military into lethal force, and talking about managing and dealing with the conflicts that instead of America coming to the aid of other nations that are being invaded, which actually is threatening the stability of the global paradigm to which we are all involved in. They are trying to turn America into mercenaries, and they're actually causing more conflict and threatening other nations and saying we're going to claim your nation because, for our national security, our nation needs to steal away your nation because you got the resources we need. Like that's, none of those things help everyday Americans. So all the people that voted for him, the POTUS 47 regime is trying to convince you that, this is a great thing. Oh, look at all the great stuff we're doing. We're going after the trans people because they're the dangerous ones. It's like, no, they're just everyday people. And the only trans agenda that exists is that they want a long-term life expectancy. And you get that by being able to be true to who you are as an individual and show up in the world how you choose. I'm not a threat to anybody. The true threat is somebody to come in and say that we have to police your genitals in order to allow you to play sports or to go to the bathroom or to, be in a classroom or any one of the number of things that they're trying to say. The government has some sort of right to, make sure, you are not breaking our arbitrary rule that we just made up, with some random executive order that says this is the way it's going to be from now on. They're trying to disappear, and make trans people not exist anymore, which is just ridiculous because they're human beings. They're going to be here regardless of whether or not you allow them to be publicly displayed and out in the open, true to who they are, and why would we ever want a world where people have to be, closed off and closeted? We had that for a long time, and we had the gay rights liberation movement the world became such a more beautiful and welcoming and happy and fun and creative and inspiring place, more love and peace and all that jazz in the world because of that. And the only people that had a problem with it was those who had a religious contention within themselves, as sensing that morally that is not acceptable to me, which is perfectly fine to have your opinions about things, but that does not give you a right to prevent other people from being who they are. Because, gay and trans people aren't going to your church and trying to tell you, how to be yourself in a space of your place of belonging and how you choose to show up in the world. So you shouldn't be able to, come into their life spaces and tell them what to do, what to think, and what to feel. It's just not right. That's not how society works. And government has no place to, come in and assert that. Like, they can only intervene on behalf of the individual if the people themselves are not able to, sort out the conflicts within themselves. But, we have human rights, and we have our Bill of Rights, and we have our civil rights, and these things are supposed to determine for us, like, this is the just bounds of how we live civically in society with one another. And there are many aspects of, trying to remove, like, trans people or anybody in the LGBTQ plus community from society. Like, that is a gross violation of the First Amendment, And so when you think about the fact that there are actually people who are so bigoted and so anti-human, and that are so bound by their, very small, narrow worldview, that they need other people to conform so that they can feel safe about themselves and how they choose to exist in the world. The problem isn't the people outside, it's the people inside not doing the work to self-assure and self-confidence that they don't need to control other people in order to feel well within themselves. So, but, the POTUS 47 regime, following the Project 2025 handbook, essentially says we need to disappear all of these people. We need to get rid of immigrants. There's only a man and there's only a woman, and there's no other gender conformities or identities, and we need to get rid of, the concept of anything other than a man and a woman in a marriage. And, they're trying to create this model of an ideal society that actually has no bearing or alignment with the American identity and the original intended purpose of the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. And so the problem with it is that the gross perversion of the interpretation of what is, acceptable in society, and what sort of laws, rules, and bounds are going to be created, and how much the government can intervene on behalf of the individual, and in this case, interfere in the life of the individual. It's in a gross overstep. And then there's just laws being broken left and right. There's no checks, there's no balance. And people have been feared and intimidated to the point where they're not doing their jobs to hold people accountable. The anti-corruption mechanisms and the corrective mechanisms that were created in our system of having separation of powers are being challenged and questioned and denied and rejected and ignored altogether by the POTUS 47 regime. And they're trying to assume that all body power amasses into an individual president, and that everything else flows under them, and that nobody can make a decision above that. Like, no, we had separation of powers intentionally to say that, there's a check on this, and there's a check on this, and there's a check on this, and that each one of those has to have that check because of the fact that no one person should have the power, because it's ultimately corruptive, especially because of what our declaration claimed ourselves independent from was the same sorts of things that POTUS 47 is trying to do. Pretend offenses are being created in order to punish people, and making it impossible for people to get, due process, and making it difficult for them to be able to defend themselves in a case, and allowing for things to encroach into society, to alter the way that we have lived for a long time. That's helped us to achieve relative accordance with one another, like separation of powers and separation of church and state. And they're trying to embed religious ideologies into our laws and things like that. And I don't believe that's right. It's perfectly fine for government to establish ethical bounds, but it cannot moralize society. The individual is moral. That's why we have self-governance. They have to be able to decide for themselves. We have ethical bounds to say, like, this is what's just, fair, reasonable, and right if we're going to deal with one another in society, especially because we're diverse and we're different, and there's bound to be conflicts of interest. We have to find a way to mutually accord, and that's where the government intervenes on our behalf. But again, mostly what this regime is doing is interference, and they're interfering on your rights and your liberties. And they have not done anything to improve the human condition. America's not great. It's not even pretty good, and things are getting worse. They're not getting better. And more people are desperate. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people that are so distraught about losing their Social Security benefits, or to lose their disability benefits, or to lose their Medicare and Medicaid benefits. These are things that we built together as a society to be able to help to promote the general welfare. One of the tenets that we said, this is what we're going to be about. This is what we're going to do together as a society so that we can make this all work in the best interest of all parties involved. And those things being whittled away because of some sense of inefficiency in the system. Listen, I am all about efficiency. I look at everything as an inefficient system. And government is the biggest inefficient system. But the problem is that when there's an inefficiency in the system, you don't break everything, and cause more discord and mayhem. Try to intentionally break the system so you can replace it with something that, you think is going to be better, that actually is serving, is skewed to serve only a few people. You recognize how something needs to be taken apart, but while you're building up a reinforcement at the same time so that people won't get left behind, And we have the means to do that. We have the means to do anything we set our minds to. There are no limits in our potential. Everything that's bad that's going on is a series of choices by the people who are in the decision-making roles, who are deciding that's where they're going to take us, that's what they're going to do, that's what they're going to be about. But we could do different things. We can make different decisions. We can make better choices. We can do something that actually works and serves the benefit of all people involved. We can reimagine and rebuild and restructure our social safety nets. Instead of having Social Security and disability and Medicaid and Medicare and Obamacare and all these things, like, we can reimagine those things into a simple, efficient, universal basic innovation that provides for the general welfaring of society, and do so in such a way that it's never questioned ever again whether or not we're going to have that as a resource. Everybody has it. It's accessible to everyone. And the means by which you approach paying for that is a simple, proper intended use of our economy. Have proper capitalism. We have specific outcomes of welfaring stewardship that we're achieving. And by doing that, you are making sure that we are providing the innovations, educations, infrastructures, economics, industries, things like that, to support us having this sort of social welfaring stewardship provided. And then you adjust the tax base in order to be able to provision and pay for all that. And then it shrinks down the administration of it because it simplifies it, and then you don't have to have as big of a government. But the problem is that that's not what they're doing. The POTUS 47 regime has no concepts of a plan even to make things better. They just want to privatize everything. The problem with privatizing everything is that now you're putting in the hands of a few people that are actually not accountable to anybody or anything, and their interests are profiting. And so you have problems like with the private insurance companies, for sake of profit, will deny somebody, the health care that they need. So that person, by the choice of this profiteer, will die because this profiteer needs to save a buck. So they will save $1 before they save a life. And that's the problem with privatizing things. I fundamentally believe that the best way to move America forward, to befit the needs of, befit the times and the needs of now, is to create a structure of government and the way of living in America as a cooperative, where every person has a seat at the table of decision making. That means all the people are brought into a branch of the government where we get to decide. We're the ones that ultimately decide what policies are going to be created by legislators, which direction the head of state is going to steer us in, and what sort of objectives we're going to reach together in terms of our proper intended use of our economy, and what we're going to be about, what we're going to stand for, and how we're going to address things that come up. Like if another pandemic happens, every person gets to be a part of the decision-making process so that nobody gets left behind. And so having a fourth branch of government also allows the people to be the anti-corruption mechanism to put a check and balance on the other branches in case they start doing things like insider trading or making public sensitive security information. And so somebody can hold them accountable, because if you ask a lot of Americans, many people actually want there to be a consequence to the fact that Signalgate happened. But nobody in the decision-making roles are going to do anything about it because none of them want to face any consequences or accountabilities. But if the people were a part of a fourth branch of government that had the decision-making powers, they could say, nope, accountability is happening, consequences are going to be rendered, somebody is going to, someone is going to be held accountable for this, who's going to take ownership of this. And then, anti-corruption mechanisms in terms of, making sure that there's somebody that's monitoring the individuals in Congress so that they're not doing insider trading when decision-making is happening. We may not be able to have, the, privied information in terms of strategic plays that are about to, pan out because some things are matters of national security, but the people themselves have to be able to have the capacity to know that something is happening and be able to monitor to make sure that how those in government and representational government are behaving is not conducive to them being bad actors with nefarious intent. And then for them to be able to call up and be like, this seems shady, you did something wrong here, we want to call you to account, and not just leave it for Congress to do, because Congress is in a bad situation. A lot of them aren't willing to act because they're so worried about getting primaried and not being reelected. And so that's actually binding and tying their hands so that they're not doing the right thing, and if the people themselves are the ones who are determining, guess what, we say you need to do this, they have kind of like an insulary protection for themselves, Congress would, because they're saying, listen, this is not me doing it. The people are telling me I have to do it. And it's part of my job as a representative to do it. And so now we're going to investigate. And then let the people be at the decision-making table as well. So, because they're relevant stakeholders as well, so that they can be a part of the process of making sure that Congress is actually, upholding appropriate investigative, questioning and whatnot, so that people can be held accountable when they do the wrong thing, so that we can also kick people out of office. I think that there's a lot of calls for individuals wanting for there to be impeachment, and I think that there's more than enough grounds for it, and not just for POTUS 47 himself, but of his entire regime. And if we had a fourth branch of government, the people themselves could call that up and say, we want there to be impeachment proceedings based off of these terms and conditions, and then Congress, who has the power of impeachment, can go to work to be able to make sure that that gets done. I think that that's where we're at in society in terms of what we need to do in order to make sure the people are self-governed, that we really are a nation, we the people. It helps us to be a more direct democracy. It also helps us to make sure that, you know, the people themselves get to decide, hey, these are the types of policies that we want to create. You know, these are the types of laws and rules that have been on the books for a long time, and it is about time to sunset them, and gives them the capacity to choose that those are the ones we want to get rid of. And then also make sure that it prevents lobbying from happening, because lobbyists can't go to congressmen anymore and bribe them to do their bidding. Like, the individuals themselves are the ones that decide. And so then it forces companies, if you really want to pass this law or get this, you know, benefit or whatever, you're gonna have to be compelling to everybody. You know, you really have to do the hard work, you know, of being competitive, instead of compulsory, you know, and bribery to get your whim and your will and your way. You have to really convince the people that this is the right thing to do. And then the people can determine, like, well, you know, the trade-offs you're trying to force us into doing is not gonna work for us, you know. And it forces companies who want to pass certain types of laws to come to the negotiating table with the people themselves, who can then say, I'm a relevant stakeholder and that's going to poison my waterway system and I don't want that to happen. That's not okay. What can you do to make sure that it doesn't poison the water system? Because if you can do that, that's what you need to do. These sorts of things. And I think that that's the best position we can be in right now, especially because you see, if everybody's trying to pinnacle the power to, you know, POTUS 47, and his decision making is based off of his values and his beliefs, which he obviously has not been paying attention to. When was the last time he talked about regular everyday people, you know, in an intelligent, coherent way? He hasn't. You know, when was the last time he spent time amongst everyday citizens just to, you know, see how they're doing, checking in with everybody? He's not. He's busy going to his golf course, being surrounded by his sycophants who are willing to pay millions of dollars to eat near him. You know, those are the people he cares about. And I'm not trying to discount that those people, they're Americans too. You know, some of them aren't, but they're Americans too. And I'm not trying to say that they're not valuable and that they can't be included. But when all of his interest goes towards them and he's not paying enough interest towards everybody else, and the policies and decisions that he's making are actually setting everybody in the lower echelons of society at a greater disadvantage than they've ever been in their entire lives, even before COVID, even during COVID, I mean. The problem is that none of the policy trajectories that POTUS 47 is taking is leading towards him even suggesting he gets, you know, an F about anybody else. It's the elites. You know, it's the parasitic elite, those who are benefiting off of the suffering of others. That's who he's focused on. That's who he cares about. That's what he's all about. That's all of his policies gears towards that, or giving him more power so that he can continue to be the means by which everybody bribes him to get what they want. Bend a knee to me, bribe me, and I'll help you get whatever you want. In the meantime, lower echelons of society don't have anything that he wants, and so they're never going to get his attention. He's never going to care and do anything about it. And he picks these people that are sycophants that work for, you know, in these positions of decision making in the various departments, and those people don't have the best interests of the lower echelons of society at heart either. Their focus is on achieving Trump's goals and his ambitions, you know, achieving Project 2025, you know, helping him advance his agenda. And he thinks he has a mandate. And, you know, I don't recall anywhere on, you know, the campaign trail that he promised that he was going to stop holding Russia accountable so that the war can be prolonged. Pretty sure he said he was going to stop it before he was even president. So everything that he's doing is contradicting to the things that he said he was going to accomplish. And he's trying to make it seem like, oh, I have to do all these bad things first, break all this stuff first, and then everything's going to be great. He's focused on deporting individuals who are here and working hard and positively contributing and participating in society, and getting rid of all of these people because, he thinks them to be useless or impediments or, threats to his control and his regime because they don't align with what his worldview. So they make pretend offenses and then oust them. He is focused on, how can I bring in rich people and give them a direct V line into citizenship, so then those people are beholden to me and then they'll vote for me and then I can stay in for a third term. That's what he's trying to progress. So the problem is, many people, and I agree, this is a tyrannical, authoritarian dictatorship being implanted into our once beloved, democratic republic. And it is eating the substance of the people. It is rotting us from the inside out. It is dissolved checks and balances. And thing is a dog eat dog, Mighty Crush the Weak, free for all hellscape. And I'm not okay with this being an outcome, but I know that we can change this. And the best way to do it, I don't believe, is to go out with posters and parade and chant and, ask for change. While symbolically it's great and it is wonderful to know that you feel like you're doing something and you're uniting with people and community and coalition building, and that's all great. The problem is that it's not tangibilities. Like, there's nothing that you do that's actually proving out to have results. You go out and you protest against Tesla, their stock takes a dip, but it's gonna get raised back up. It is a company and it is producing products, and it's not like it's going to die anytime soon because there are some people that actually want their products. And I don't think that the appropriate approach is try to attack a company because you don't like the person who's at the head of it, as much as the fact that I dislike what the company is becoming because it's nothing what it promised it was going to be, which I think is hilariously hypocritical for the fact that, Musk himself is trying to go after OpenAI to say, you're not fulfilling your original mission. It's like Tesla isn't performing its original mission either, But I don't think that the appropriate approach is to attack and try to dismantle Musk because somehow you need to remove him from, his pinnacle that he's created for himself because he's rigged the system ever in his favor. I think where our energy needs to go and what we need to focus on is building for ourselves, What's the saying? Don't fight what you hate, save what you love. Like, we really need to focus on building things together that can do what we need the government to do, but it's failing to do for us. And if we can focus on building that, spend our time, our effort, and our energy instead of fighting that old system, build a new system, we can make that old system obsolete. And the point is not to chip them down to size. The point is to lift ourselves up. And yes, it would be so much easier and it would make so much more sense and it would be good humanity if the upper echelons of society paid their fair share in taxes, and realized, like, we should be giving back to the people who are doing all of the wonderful work to hold up society and civilization that makes the wonderful life that they get to live in privilege even possible. Like, and not just throw some, crumbs to the side and keep people, in servitude, but rather, like, if we have the potential to innovate and to build all this stuff, if we can use that as a force for good to uplift the lower echelons of society over here, there's no reason for us to have conflicts anymore, because not everybody wants to be rich and flying in airplanes and, globetrotting around the world or whatever. people have different interests and different wants and different desires and different needs, but guess what? Everybody wants to survive. Everybody wants to have creature comforts. Everybody wants to feel safe and sound and to have a roof over their head, food in their stomach, water to drink, good health care. These are all basic human needs that are like the bare necessities of life, and we can provide that. And yes, it would be so much easier if these people had a heart, and if they actually cared about good humanity, and if they actually had the best interest of humanity in America at heart. They would be working to raise up the lower echelons of society, to be in a state of living the good life and well-being. And again, the good life for, most people is not living, eating caviar every night or whatever. I don't even know what rich people do. Like, I have no aspirations to even understand their world. I definitely don't belong in it, but not because I think of them, as lesser people, but just like, that's your interest, it's not mine. Many people just like to live in touch with nature and love to read books and explore the world and conversate with everyday people and just like live their life and homemake and, cultivate their education and personal development and to build and innovate and craft and, be of good service to humanity. Like, they find so much joy in just everyday things. I mean, just being a mother or a father, a parent is in itself the most rewarding and enriching experience that anybody have. You have everything in the world you would ever need just by having that experience, And so the aspirations of people are not going to be the same. And that's why it's like people try to think that not everybody can live the good life. The good life is different for everybody. But the good life is not possible if you have to worry about where you're going to get your next meal, worry about whether you can have a roof over your head, whether you're going to be able to pay for, your power. And those things are, we can innovate out the problem of accessibility and affordability and stability and integrity and maintenance and these sorts of things. We can innovate systems and we can broaden the capacity of our existing systems, shift and alter, and bring them all into having a proper intended use of outcome of achieving welfare and stewardship for all people, and then just maintain that on a continuum. And then we know everybody's living the good life because they have their bare necessities of life, right? And then they're free and liberated to pursue, take risks for higher things, which is what is ultimately most important in society. And I fundamentally believe that if we in the lower echelons of society, I am one of you, if we work together to build up the means to elevate ourselves, to achieve the good life together, there's many of us, we could all work together doing that. We wouldn't have the time, effort, or energy to invest into their schema, propping up their world necessities, because we'll be so involved in working our own hands to bend and mold and shape and configure and develop and establish and, rework the systems, whatever we have to do in order to make sure we're all living the good life. Then it will dawn on them like, wow, they don't really need us. But we kind of need them, because if they're busy doing all of this stuff for themselves and making the world work for them so that they're living the good life, they don't have the time, effort, or energy to be of service to us anymore. So what are we going to do? It's going to knock them down a notch, and not in a sense of like, we're trying to beat you down, but just they're not going to be able to live up here in this sustainable state, unsustainable state of, their ideal version of elitism and extreme concentrations of power, wealth, and influence, because they derive that money, power, and influence from us. And so we'll be so involved in taking care of ourselves, since they don't care. Somebody's got to take care of us. We're going to take care of ourselves. they'll realize, wow, we don't have enough people helping us to maintain the status that we want to achieve. And they're going to say, you know what, it's actually worth it to us to put a little bit of investment over here to help them, because guess what? When we invest over here and we help them, we free them up to take risks for higher things, and then they can help us more. They would have the actual means to. And yeah, you're not going to be able to convince people to do it for such dirt cheap, but then that's when negotiation comes in, and then we can actually have what we actually need in society, which isn't just a workforce, but we have independent contractors, independent outcome engineers that are capable individuals that are, not just specialists, but like Renaissance people. You can do it all. You are craftsmen of certain specific things that you excel at, but you're capable of doing so much. And then when you're kind of able to do anything and everything, you become a multi-purpose tool almost, and you're able to go out and do many different things, and then you can be of service to individuals and then contract with other individuals to say, hey, listen, I have these wonderful capacities. I would love to be of service to help you in this way for this time period to achieve this particular outcome, and then you do a job which is, rendering service for fair compensation. And you do the work, which is just cultivating your craft and your capabilities and applying it in a specific, proper, intended, intentional way. And so the people in the upper echelons of society will say, if we keep a little less for ourselves, give a little more over here, they will be able to give more over here in us in terms of service, and we'll actually be able to get more done together. But we're not going to be able to convince them by forcing them and telling them you're bad people and punish them and attack them and all these things. You're not going to convince them to align with your interests and be of service to you. The best way to do it is to inspire them. Let's not try to be disciplinarians. Let's be inspirations, which I want America to be an inspiration to the world instead of a disciplinarian. I want us to inspire others to see like we really can do it. And if we work together in an intentional way, establishing a proper intended use of our capitalism, a proper intended use of our American identity, and live it. We don't need to ask permission, and we don't need to get permission from, the upper echelons or even, the government itself to be the American identity and live that in that ontology and be about it, and replicate that and promote it and generate it and propagate it. We can do all of those things on our own. We're very capable people. Sure, we need a little bit of guidance, and that's what government is supposed to do, but they're not in the position, those who are in government right now are not in a position to be leaders. They're control freaks, with personal vendettas, and they're, all about making things happen for themselves, but that is actually to our benefit a little bit, in the sense of like, while they're so busy distracting themselves with things that actually don't matter, we can focus on the things that actually do matter and build up what is necessary for us to be well. And then model that in an example to say, listen, if we could do this at a broader scale at, an actual government level, we would be able to be a magnificent, quite capable country. And then imagine our capacity to say, we want to take the American identity of welfaring stewards, we're stewards of welfaring stewardship, and we want to extend that as an offering to other nations. So instead of our exports being stuff and things, our export is actually our expertise, the capacity to achieve welfaring stewardship, and then extend that in our services to other nations to be able to do that, to help fast track currently developing nations to be able to achieve this as well. And again, working from the lower echelons to raise them up, which then convinces the upper echelons that it actually is better to your benefit if you help them out too, because then it frees them up to take risks for higher things and to be able to help you to achieve your good outcomes that you would like to do. and extending that to other nations, not trying to conform everybody, certainly not trying to make everybody be America. Unique, independent, sovereign nations are valuable, important, and necessary, respecting everybody's independence. But saying like there is a way that we might be able to help to kind of like perfect this craft and create a template by which we can go in and do efficiencies in systems and proper intended use for your economics, and then the right type of projects and proposals and templates and specific innovations and certain types of architectures and different things that can be implemented in a sequential sort of way to be able to build up establishment for ever more liberation of individuals to achieve a state of living the good life in a state of welfaring, and to be active participants and contributors to the stewardship of that. And to ultimately do that in such a way, like our proper intended use is to be stewards of the planet, so we can live within the planetary boundaries, so we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals authored by the United Nations, and to live in accordance with an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, and peaceful world. And we can do that. We have the means to do that. You just need a little bit of like specific direction in order to do that. A basic template that everybody can involve with, and then a schedule for how things should get the ball rolling in a sense, and then inviting everybody in a welcoming situation that they can thrive in, and they will be a part of it. It will be a spontaneous cooperation, because it will be in the best interest of them. And ultimately, the purpose is to make sure that at first America works for 100% of the people here in the shortest time possible without ecological offense through spontaneous cooperation, so that it's not at the disadvantage of anyone, so that nobody gets left behind. And then extending that construct of like that is what's just, fair, reasonable, and right as stewardship, and extend that to other nations to help them to grow and to develop. And we'll be able to see a reduction of conflict. It reminds me of a really great book that I read. It's a very difficult book to read, but a very important one. It's called The Lotus Effect, or Locust Effect. Locusts, like the little bugs that come in and eat everything. The book itself is basically just talking about you can't solve for poverty in society if you don't stop violence from happening. And so if we build up stewardship, we can actually do the two birds, one stone sort of thing. We can create the stability and the conformity that is integrity bound, that's necessary in order to prevent corruption that allows for violence to perpetuate. And then also at the same time take care of the poverty, which gives people stability and confidence and capacity to self-preserve and self-contain. And then incentive for people to do the right thing and self-govern in the appropriate ways to align with doing the right thing, because it is in their best interest to do that. You definitely get more out of involving in the good thing than you do with the bad things. And then setting up the system by which individuals are able to accomplish this on their own at small scales, but is interwoven, in interrelated and interconnected with many other individual nodes across the world. And then we establish a reinforcement of self-reliant, self-sustained, self-determined, free and independent people, all working within the same type of modeled structure to achieve proper intended use of welfare and stewardship in their own unique ways, building off of a basic template to achieve these sorts of things, and over time lifting everybody up to a higher standard of living so they can live the good life. Recognizing there's always going to be a lower echelon of society, and there's always going to be an elite, upper echelon of society. Not because, there's elite like they're better, but just there's an upper echelon because they want to live in a different way. And that there's always going to be more people that want to live, just in tranquility and liberty and freedom and simplicity and joy and happiness and life fulfillment in these broad and amazing and varied different ways. The lower echelons isn't just here, it's varied levels of life experience, but there is always going to be a select few that want to be in this very small, very limited paradigm, very limited world, because that's how they get their kicks, and perfectly fine to them as long as they're not predatory and they're not invading other people and imposing their will on others and causing harm, these sorts of things. Let them be, let them do their thing, but let's stop pretending in society that that's the ideal and everybody needs to work towards that. It's like, no, the ideal in society is the good life. And what is that? What does that look like for you? What does it feel like this is right, this is good? That's different for everybody. And society should really be about opening as many opportunities as possible for everybody to have that sense within themselves, and not because it's a conformity to what society tells you is right, but that is right for yourself. And then making sure that we create the just bounds and laws and regulations and rules that are necessary to make sure we can stay in alignment with that, without overstepping, overbreaching, overreaching. And that's really where government's role is. And if we start building that as individual, independent people, we will be able to justify government being changed from the outside in, to say, we are taking back our powers to make these decisions for ourselves. And we're shrinking you down to size that really all we need you for is to do these few things, and those few things, while it's not going to take a lot of people to make those decisions, we need to make sure that the power is distributed amongst all of the people, not a small group of people where the power is concentrated and then they can by a whim with a finger overturn the world. Like, we really need to make sure that all the people can carry their own weight, and that decision makers are able to make decisions on our behalf, but their capacity to affect change is limited in scope and scale and contextualized and conformed to corrective mechanisms and anti-corruption mechanisms so that they don't step out of bounds. And then I think we'll have more people aspiring to be in government that really are about public service and less about, I want to get power so I can make all the decisions and make, personal gains out of it. Because that system won't be able to be gamed that way anymore. And so we will have better people stepping into the roles of representational government. And then we will have better quality outcomes in terms of our nation and in terms of our relationships internationally. And as a global community, we will all fare much better. My ultimate desire is to become a leader of the free world. I do believe that that would be possible by me becoming president of the United States, because I have the will and the want and the need for us to improve the inefficiencies of our government system in such a way where we are empowering ourselves to be a more direct democracy, making sure people are self-governed, self-determined, self-sufficient, self-sustaining, free and independent people, and that government is put into its proper place, but it is accountable to the people and does what's necessary to help to make sure we are all working cooperatively towards mutual interests, mutual securities, mutual benefits, mutual respects, these sorts of things. And knowing that I have this grand vision and grand strategy that I'm working towards to establish welfare and stewardship as being the identity, the American identity, and then hopefully globally the world, so that we can steward, more habitable, livable planet and more cooperative, healthy, sustainable, just and peaceful society, and a more intentionally evolved civilization that's moving in a direction that is somewhere we would actually want to go, in a way that becomes compelling for the upper echelons and for the lower echelons, so that we can work together cooperatively instead of competitively, or combatively. And knowing that there is a lot of work that has to be done, and even in a two-term situation, I wouldn't be able to accomplish all of this on my own, but I have enough of a very specific framework that can be implemented, that can make a tremendous amount of progress in that short amount of time, that would be able to set the trajectory for us to just kind of like ride the wave of progress. And then those who come in leadership afterwards just have to kind of like keep up the system, in such a way that makes sure that we are all holding each other accountable and responsible in maintaining the commitments that we've made to each other. It's very much what our founders were able to do. You know, the very first presidents that we had were carrying that torch together, saying, you know, we're still a union, we're helping to make adjustments, befit the times, you know, addressing the needs of now, shifting and implementing new strategies and trying new things, and broadening our horizons, and, you know, giving ourselves the opportunities to expand and make new discoveries, and to become better versions of ourselves, but containing within that the same fundamental element of integrity throughout, upholding to our fundamental ideals of our Declaration of Independence, and being conformed by the constitutional restrictions that we've put on ourselves, the bounds and limitations by which we know we can ethically apply ourselves in such a way that we're not going to be led astray. We have the potential to get ourselves to where we need to go if we can just set ourselves on a trajectory, maintain a vision, and to hold ourselves, you know, responsible to upholding our Declaration and our Constitution. And I know that there are plenty of other people who have been in the political game for a very long time. They've established themselves, they have networking and connections, and, you know, they have public faces. They've been out on the public scene for a long time, and they know how to champion crowds and get them all revved up and whatnot, and can get a lot of people to activate and do different things at different times. And it's all inspiring. We need leaders like that. This is important, and I'm not trying to say that that's not necessary, but really what we need right now is firm footing on stable ground. We need a definite, proper intended use for our government, for our economy, for our progress, the things that we're doing. We need to have a sense of continuity, you know, coherence. We need to have a relatable identity that we can all fall into alignment with, not based off of forced conformity, but rather like natural involvement, like the spontaneous cooperation and the sense that this is for my well-being. And when I do this, I am living the good life. And it's important for me to make sure everybody else lives the good life, because their sense of security and stability and well-being actually adds reinforcements to my own sense of security, stability, and well-being. And that, again, as we help to take care of our survival and get that on lock, you know, it's down, we got that taken care of, it's just a thing that just keeps going, and it, you know, gift that keeps on giving sort of thing, then we can take risks for higher things. And then we can start addressing the stuff that's far more serious, climate change, dealing with cancers and things like that we need to solve for these sorts of things. And we probably could, and we probably would have already, had we not been stuck, you know, dealing with basic survival, or this petty infighting of culture wars and things like that. Like, we need to distinguish the personal dominion of every person. So the government can't come in and try to tell you what to do, what to think, what to feel, what to do with your body. You know, how you get to show up in the world, how you get to participate, these sorts of things. The government doesn't have the right to make those determinations for you. They are not God, and certainly are not almighty powers. Ultimately, the individual is where the power rests. Our Constitution says it specifically, that the power rests with the people, and that the power that goes to the federal government and the state is only, retained by them because the people have given them that power. And they're trying to take more power than they actually have right now. And the problem is the people aren't saying, nope, you don't get that. And they're also trying to take away our capacity to say no, trying to prevent us from being able to reverse this negative trend. That's why it's important to establish a fourth branch of government, so that we, the people, have the capacity to make those decisions and say, nope, this is the power of the people. I have a power to self-govern. Government cannot intervene on my behalf, because you need to have justifications for that is in alignment and attunement with following our, fundamental human rights, and then our Bill of Rights, and our, our social and civic ideals that we have determined and established for ourselves as what we need. Protect our civil rights, these sorts of things. Take back the power. We have more power than protesting and voting. We have the power to choose how we're going to apply ourselves. And I think that if more people felt, if you feel the sense that you need to do something, and you want to make a change, and you're desperate, and you're terrified, and you don't know what to do, and you don't want to see what's happening unfolding, and you want to put a stop to it, literally the best thing that you can do is to join forces to be able to bring about welfare and stewardship in America, start building up the necessary infrastructures, educations, and innovations, and networking and communication channels amongst the lower echelons of society. Unite as a fundamental force for good. Focus your attention on doing that, and leave the rest of society. The thing is that, again, they're going to fall apart because they need us, and they won't have us because we'll be too busy working for ourselves to improve ourselves. And it's not in a selfish way. They're the selfish ones, trust me. We're doing it selflessly. Like, we're doing this for ourselves and for each other, for our children, and for the benefit of everybody in America, and benefit of everybody in the world, the benefit of all humankind, and for generations to come. We're doing this because this will give us something tangible to work towards. This will give us real world solutions. It will give us viable, applicable processes and projects and procedures and implementation strategies and methods and modes and means to achieve certain specific definite ends. And we can achieve all of those things together just by applying it. It gives us thrivability, and we experience it in the process of. It's a lot more hopeful than continuing to fight. Because think about it this way: when you go out and you protest, at the end of the day, you go home to your house. How has your life changed and improved? You get a little bit of excitement and sense of like, stuck it to the man today. I told him what's up. I'm not going to stand for this anymore. This is what I stand for. Totally, it's important to have that sense of feeling like you were heard and you were cared about and cared for. It's important. But how did it fundamentally change your day-to-day life? Did it help you to put more food on your table? Did it help you to have better sense of knowing you're going to be able to pay your rent and your bills and still have a little bit of money left over at the end of the day to go towards some creature comforts? Did it give you a sense that you don't have to worry about your neighbor down the street, little old lady who lives by herself, whether or not she's going to have any food to eat because Meals on Wheels isn't there anymore? Did it give you a sense that your children are going to be able to go to school today, and they're going to be able to play with all of their friends, as they are? There's not going to be, ICE members coming to steal away immigrants, and there's not going to be, school board members coming and forcing kids to go to certain particular bathrooms or kick them out of sports. Knowing that your children can go in a welcoming environment, knowing that they're going to be safe in that environment, those are the sorts of things that we need to work towards, because the current government, POTUS 47's regime is not caring about that. They're not going to provide that for you. They're not going to promote the general welfare. They're not going to provide for the common defense. They are not going to ensure domestic tranquility. And so if they're not going to do that, the idea is, instead of getting the people in power to care, we need to get people into power who care. Those who care need to be brought into power. And right now, we're the ones that care. And so we need to give ourselves the power to make the decisions to do different things. And I know that there's a reasonable way to initiate this in small measures, across the country. If everybody, instead of everybody coming together to show a force of millions of people marching down the street holding up signs, if instead everybody went and applied, let's say you spent 5 hours that day protesting, right? What if instead that million people spent 5 hours that day going to build up certain specific projects in their local communities that helped to make sure that there was stability within that community, helping to do repair work or upgrade, the housing that has inefficiencies for their power bills, and you do a little bit of work on their yard or something like that to make it easier for it to maintain. You help to build a garden for a local community. You help to spend some time with some elderly people that really need some care, and you went and you provided childcare for individuals who could go out and work. And something like that would be more constructive, more productive, and more engineering an outcome that is definite and certain and tangible and positive than it would be to go out and hold up a sign somewhere. I've never been, a petition peddling activist. In my opinion, activism for me is, how can I lessen the struggle of others? And I don't think about what I'm getting in return for it. I don't concern myself with, I do this because, I need to get compensated for it. Even if I do get some sort of compensation in return, it's not expected. It's appreciated, absolutely. But it's about lessening the struggle of others. It's about helping them in ways that I know they can't do for themselves. Knowing that if I show up and I show out and I do my best, and it's, no small thing done badly, and I really just devote myself to being of service to others, it will improve their life in some capacity that then helps them, liberates them to take risks for higher things, that then they can return a favor to me, or in many cases, as I ask lots of people to do, pay it forward to the next person. So it's not even coming back to me. I want it to go out into the world to other people, because then you can convince that other person to do the same thing. And then we get the ball rolling in terms of like one small act of kindness can have a tremendous ripple effect to improve the world. And I like to do things that way. When I am uncertain and I don't know what's going on, and I need a sense of, grounding in potentials, I always look to my concept of like, how can I create, pragmatic solutions to achieve welfare and stewardship within a community that I'm currently in, or that I'm getting ready to visit, or I've been into before, or just a random hypothetical community that I can imagine exists, based off of my understanding of, we're all pretty much the same type of people, just living a little bit different in terms of our cultural identities. But I work on those sorts of things and come up with ideas and solutions to problems, because to me it's much more intelligent to build something that makes a difference, or design something, than it is to infight with somebody else because they're doing it a different way, or I don't like what they're doing because it's impacting me negatively. I certainly do believe in righteous anger and standing up for yourself, and asserting boundaries and letting people know that's wrong and you shouldn't do that. and definitely expressing yourself in terms of like virtue signaling. It's not a bad thing. This is saying, this is what I stand for, this is what I will not stand for. And I love to communicate with other people and express ideas in a sense of like, I agree with that too, but this is how I interpret it. This is why, I like digital social medias and things like that, because you can make those expressions, just like I'm doing right now with this video. It's like expressing what I stand for, and what I won't stand for. It's important to share that with other people, because that's how we mind meld and we share ideas with one another, and then we start to create a cohesive paradigm that we live in together that says, this is really how we should be looking at the world. This is how we should take things into context. This is how we should assert ourselves in certain conditions and in situations. And, this is one way we can perceive it, one way that we can, project out certain types of outcomes, position ourselves in the capacity to do that, propose to others to involve as well, and then proposition ourselves to, take on this task, and then perceive the opportunities to make things shift and improve, and then watch out for obstacles and work through those as is necessary, because ultimately problem solving isn't just, the tendency of a few people. It's literally how we exist as human beings. We're always problem solvers. We're pattern recognition, problem solving creatures of habit. And we are always looking for the path of least resistance. And if we align ourselves with a sense of the least resistant thing is to just be a good person uncompromisingly, and to do good by others, and to lessen the struggle of others, then we're moving in natural alignment and attunement with good humanity. And then we don't have time to infight with one another, which then just causes, chaos and controversy. And it stirs the pot and actually empowers the people who prey on the individuals who want to infight. There's a lot of people that are in the upper echelons of society that actually make their money and their wealth by being, pot stirrers, kicking up sand and stirring up trouble, and they make money doing that, creating controversy and chaos and mayhem. And if they don't have a reaction from us in terms of us fighting back at that, they lose power and they get deflated. They'll try harder because, they don't want to let go of their capacity to earn money off of being an asshole. Excuse my language, but the less that we have to devote to them, the more we have to devote to ourselves, and the more that we will gain benefits, and the less they'll be able to benefit off of exploitation of us. And that's a pretty good goal to be able to reach for. So absolutely share your opinions and assert your boundaries and show the world, your virtue signaling of what you will stand for and what you will not stand for, but spend more time focusing on building tangibilities and building networks when you are collaborating with people. Like when you're on social media and you're making these connections, that's what I really try for, is I try to express these things to be able to make connections with individuals who I may be later to go to them and say, hey, listen, we've been connecting on these topics and we seem to be of like mind, or at least similar to. What do you think about taking on an approach to take on a venture together to try to achieve these certain things in a specific way? How do you feel about partnering together in this regard or whatnot? Or, I'm really looking for somebody that I might be able to implant an idea into and let them take it with their creativity to do something wonderful with it. How would you like to be able to have a conversation with me so that we can discuss in more detail how we might be able to, help me help you help yourself, so that you can help others, so that we can make some real positive change in the world. That's what I really like to focus on and be about. That, and also getting back into alignment of discovering the human element online and how to build that out into tangibilities that can help us to affect change in the real world, and to better understand ourselves and each other so that we can create a cohesive unity with one another. So society can be, less about ourselves and more about each other. Less about fighting and conflict and more about cooperating and collaborating. Which brings me back to the whole idea, like, I really would like America to be established like a cooperative where every American has stake in the game. We have a seat at the table. Our economy includes us. We have resource commons that belong to everybody, that no individual can dismantle, but it's accessible to everybody in such a way that helps us to raise up the lower echelons of society to live the good life and to build that up as tangibilities and then to steward them, so that we can maintain welfaring for all people. I hope that more individuals can realize the potential in doing something like that. It's far more constructive to do something like that than it is to be destructive and trying to fight against, the POTUS 47 regime that is completely out of control, completely out of their minds. They have lost the plot of the story so long ago, and they are really doing a very terrible job at everything. They're bad actors with nefarious intent that have lost their way. And I hope that we can build better models of good humanity that help to inspire them to change their ways and to, start working with us that do things that benefit all of us instead of just them. I think that once we show them that what they're doing doesn't matter to us anymore, stop giving them time, effort, and energy, stop giving them attention, there's going to be a little bit of a fight, for a time, because they're going to fight to try to hold on to control. But eventually they'll realize, we don't really hold the cards, the lower echelons of society do. And we're going to have to find a way to come into a mutual agreement with them in order for us to succeed. Because without them, we fail. Without us, they fail. And so we have to be able to achieve that balance, but it's not going to come from the upper echelons. They got it great, and they're building up their bunkers to, survive Armageddon or whatever. They think they're going to be able to make it without us. They're not going to be able to, but, we need to bring them down to the level of mutualities with us, in a sense of like, we need to have an equal balance in order for us to be united with one another. We're not saying that you don't get to do amazing things and be amazing people and strive to take risks for higher things. We're just saying that we have to be able to do that too. And we're going to take it on us to do that for ourselves. And in the meantime, you're not going to be able to take advantage of us anymore because we aren't going to allow it. And I think that's the way that we need to proceed forward. If we can do so in such a way where we can inspire that type of activity, by the time it's in the next election, we can vote in somebody like me that has a vision and cares and wants to be able to build a better world for everyone. But at the same time, it will open us up to the opportunities. Maybe there's even better people out there that have more to offer, and the whole point is, like, I want people to imagine what is possible by having, somebody that cares, who's a natural caregiver and compassionate and, creative and envisions the future and works towards building those sorts of things. Imagine that type of person in the position of POTUS in comparison to the one that's in there now, and really think what type of outcomes you're going to be able to achieve. Here I am saying I want to give you personal dominion that is secured constitutionally, and that you constitutionally have a seat at the table guaranteed in a fourth branch of government civics. Powers back to the people. You have the ultimate decisions. We all work together with the resource commons to lift up the standard of the lower echelons of society so everybody lives the good life without, combative approach towards the upper echelons of society. so that we can all work in a mutual unity with one another, respecting, appreciating, and understanding one another in a sense of like, this is what we're united, this is what we stand for, or more hatred, intolerance, violence, subverting the law, perverting the law, distorting the law, uh, criminality without consequence, bad humanity, cruelty, just outright cruelty, incoherent babble, not even understanding like the basic, struggles and kitchen table concerns of everyday Americans. Like, you're not going to get sympathy for your life from somebody who has never in their life had to struggle, has never in their life experienced the lower echelons of society. He took a 1 day short-term tour of McDonald's and flipped some, did some fry stacking or whatever, and it doesn't make him responsive to the people or to understand the situation or the plight, and everything is in favor for him. And I don't understand why he spends so much time, effort, and POTUS 47 spends so much time, effort, and energy parading himself around like he's, some kind of idol or something, going to all these sporting events, which is very expensive cost on American public. I do respect the fact that it's really hard to be confined in the bubble, as they call it, being president, and not being able to, live your normal life. And, Trump really liked his life, as he's always said, and he misses it. He doesn't like being president, because he does it because he cares about the people. I don't think that's the case, but, he definitely gave up his normal life in order to do this, and he's trying to get some of that normalcy back by going golfing all the time and doing all these other things. So I understand that, but it's also, he's doing it right now in a time when America is actually suffering from losses of so much, and there's an efficiency issue supposedly in government, and they're trying to shore up all this inefficiencies and these frauds and waste and stuff. It's a terrible time to be making decisions to spend millions and millions of dollars to go out gallivanting around doing things that are not actually tangible work for presidency. Him signing executive orders for randomness here and there, that's not being a president, and he's hardly even delegating tasks to individuals. He's just got sycophants that have their own agendas that are aligned with his, and he just lets them go to work. And none of those things are in alignment with actually helping out the American people. It's just achieving Project 2025 and the POTUS 47's agenda of, amassing control for him and his sycophants. It's making America great. In their process of making America great, they're failing to do any good, and it's disappointing to see that. I would have liked to see more ownership and responsibility, accountability, commitment to the truth, and a sense of like accepting, instead of fighting about past grievances, like really focus on this is what we're doing right now, and working towards things that we can do together as a collective society. But, everything that they're talking about is MAGA. And if you're not MAGA, you're against us, and then we'll fight to, limit your capacities. So it's either you're with us or against us, and it's just pitting side against side, and it's splitting us and factioning us and actually making us weaker, to the point where we are now being subjected on social media from propaganda from China that's trying to make Americans fearful for the fact that Trump is sending away all the immigrants and then causing all of these tariffs, and so regular everyday Americans are going to have to be working in sweatshops. It's propaganda, and it's, implanting in our heads a sense of we're a failed state, and then people are going to give up because they think everything's so lost. There's no confidence coming from POTUS 47 at all to say, we got this, guys. Instead, it's hang in there, everyone, hold on, don't be what do they call a panikin or whatever, everything's going to be fine. Golden age, you know, like all that glitters is gold. That's not the case. You know, there is things that are more precious than that, more important than that. Money is not everything. Everything and everything they do, if you look at everything they do, it's centered around money and profits and controlling people in a way that subjects them, weakens them, so they're easier to prey upon and exploit for more money. And so there's nothing that they're offering that is something that we would actually want, you know, when you really think about it. So imagine a world in 10 years of what sort of outcomes we would be living in and what sort of options and choices we would have to choose from. What sort of offerings would be available if we live out in a 10-year trajectory of the outcome continuum of negative outcome consequences of the POTUS 47 regime and the MAGA cohort taking us in this really dark direction that so far has been not a good place for most people. And then imagine 10 years of progress of working together in the lower echelons of society to help to raise everybody up to the standard of living the good life, doing welfare and stewardship together. Imagine what sort of opportunities we will have to live out of, what sort of decision making we can have, you know, what sort of experiences we will have, what sort of world will we be looking at? Is it going to be one that you would be fearful that, you know, other people would want to come and attack us? No, because we're their friend and their ally, and we're helping them with stewardship, and we're making the world a better place. You know, America's awesome doing that. Whereas with POTUS 47 regime, it's like tariff war leading us towards a greater world war, you know, and then thinking that, oh, if we just put all our money and trillions of dollars into, you know, our military budget and we got these special weapons and killing force, that's somehow going to deter people from wanting to come after us because we are turning ourselves into everyone's enemy, you know, like it's the way of POTUS 47 and the MAGA cohort is conflict, it's controversy, it's chaos, it's mayhem, it's combative, it's cruel, it's inhumane, lacks justice. There is no justice in it at all. And there's no reasonableness to it. It's not fair, it's not right. And look at the opportunity to diverge from that continuum onto another one that says we're giving ourselves the best possible chance to have good outcomes that lead us in a direction we actually want to go, that's going to work to make sure that the world works for 100% of the people here without the disadvantage of anybody, so nobody gets left behind. You know, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, the world works for everybody. Inclusion, so nobody gets disadvantaged, and or equity, so that nobody gets disadvantaged, and inclusion, so nobody gets left behind. Having that type of trajectory to move towards, that's promise, that's hope, that's potential. You know, that's something that you can invest in, that's something you can trust in, you know. And then we create the proper intended use of our capitalism to achieve, you know, outcoming engineering, welfare and stewardship. We create a tax system that actually supports that, that is one that, I mean, even the upper echelons of society would be in for, because again, it helps them to help us to help themselves, you know, and it's a mutually beneficial, mutual reinforcing, mutually respectful, you know, mutual securities situation. And the potentials in that way is enlightening and positive. And you know, there's no guarantees, but it certainly looks like a ever more healthy, sustainable, just, and peaceful world is possible moving in that direction. And there's no hope going the other way for us to ever secure an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, and peaceful world. You know, we can do better, we can do great, but fail to do good. But great is defined by people who pervert and distort justice and exploit power and create a dog-eat-dog, mighty crush the weak, free-for-all hellscape. Their sense of jurisprudence, their sense of what defines and delineates great is a lot of things that are cruel and just evil, you know? So I want to encourage people, go towards the light. Let's move in a direction that's positive and reinforcing a collective, collaborative, community-based, local, individual self-determination trajectory of, independence with collective unity, working towards welfare and stewardship, and diverging away from the continuum of negative outcome consequences that will likely lead us to a larger world war and a failed state of the United States. So with that, I'm grateful for your valuable time, attention, and consideration of everything I've said. Until next time, be well.